A wealthy man walked into a small seaside cafe, expecting nothing more than a quiet meal. But when a struggling waiter insisted on paying for his food out of his own pocket, what followed changed both their lives forever. This is a story about how one simple act of kindness turned into something extraordinary, and how compassion, even from those who have little, can light up the darkest corners of life. Ethan Cole's day always started before sunrise. The Blue Lantern Café sat on the edge of Harborview's old pier, where tourists came for the view, not the people who served them. Ethan, 28, tightened his faded apron, glanced at the peeling paint on the cafe walls, and whispered to himself, "One day, I'll have a place of my own." He had once studied culinary arts, the kind of dreamer who could turn ordinary ingredients into art. But when his father fell ill 2 years ago, Ethan traded his knives and recipes for hospital bills and double shifts. The dream was still there, tucked behind tired eyes and a smile that never fully reached them. Still, he showed up, rain or shine. He served pancakes with warmth, offered encouragement to his coworkers, and even slipped free muffins to the old man who played harmonica outside the door. Ethan believed something most people had forgotten, that kindness, even in small doses, could keep hope alive. After hours of serving tables, Ethan clocked out, only to walk home under flickering streetlights. His apartment was small, just a single room with cracked windows and a photo of his father on the wall. He counted the few dollars left from his tips and sighed. "Maybe next month," he whispered, glancing at the brochure of a culinary course he could no longer afford. Yet, when he saw his neighbor, a single mother, struggling to carry groceries, he didn't hesitate to help. That's who Ethan was, a giver, even when he had little to give. One gray afternoon, rain lashed against the cafe windows. Business was slow. Only a few customers sat with steaming cups of coffee. Then the door opened, and a man in his late 50s walked in, well-dressed, composed, yet distant. His name, though Ethan didn't know it yet, was Richard Lane. He sat alone in the corner and ordered something simple, soup and bread. But when the meal ended and he reached for his wallet, his expression changed. Confusion, then embarrassment. I must have left it at the hotel," he stammered. "I'll come back tomorrow to settle it." The cafe had strict policies. Normally, unpaid meals came out of the waiter's paycheck. But Ethan didn't even think twice. "Don't worry about it, sir," he said gently. "Dinner's on me today." Richard looked up, surprised. "Are you sure? That's very kind of you." Ethan smiled. "Someone once told me, kindness is a meal you never regret serving." It wasn't scripted. It came from his heart. Richard hesitated, studying Ethan's face. There was no trace of pity, only quiet sincerity. He nodded slowly, thanked him, and left. Ethan didn't expect to see him again. To him, it was just another act of kindness in a life filled with them, small quiet gestures that made the world a bit softer. But this time, the world was about to notice. Now, let's see what happens next. Days passed, and the man never came back. Ethan didn't dwell on it. He had long learned that good deeds were their own reward. Still, when he saw the empty chair where the man had sat, he felt a strange tug of curiosity. He went about his routines, refilling cups, wiping tables, joking with the cook. But deep down, he wondered what had brought that man into the cafe alone, with such quiet sadness behind his eyes. Ethan didn't know it yet, but the man had noticed far more than his kindness that day. A week later, just before closing, the cafe door opened again. Rain-soaked and winded, the same man stepped inside, Richard Lane. This time, he wasn't wearing a business suit. Just a simple coat and scarf, like any other traveler passing through town. He looked around until his gaze met Ethan's. A slow smile crept across his face. "Didn't think I'd forget, did you?" he said, placing a crisp $100 bill on the counter. Ethan chuckled nervously. "I wasn't worried. But that's too much." "Consider it a thank you," Richard said. "And maybe a tip for making me feel human that day." Their eyes met, two men from completely different worlds, yet connected by something deeper than status or money. Richard stayed for a cup of coffee, insisting Ethan sit with him during his break. It was the first time in months Ethan had sat as a customer instead of a server. "So," Richard began, "you've got a good heart. But tell me something, what's your dream?" Ethan hesitated. "My dream." He laughed softly. "To own a small restaurant. Nothing fancy. Just a place where people can eat, talk, and feel seen. But dreams like that don't usually survive rent and hospital bills. Richard studied him quietly, his expression softening. You remind me of myself when I was your age. Hungry, not for food, but for purpose. Ethan smiled, unaware of how prophetic those words would become. As the cafe closed for the night, Richard noticed the old harmonica player struggling outside in the cold. Before leaving, he slipped a folded bill into the musician's coat pocket without saying a word. Ethan caught the gesture from inside and smiled. You didn't have to do that, Ethan said as Richard turned to go. Richard shrugged. You started it. That single sentence would echo in Ethan's mind for days. The next morning, Richard returned, this time for breakfast. Then again the next day. Soon, he became a regular. He'd sit in Ethan's section, watching the rhythm of the cafe, the quiet exchanges, the laughter, the unseen kindnesses. He saw Ethan pay for a customer's meal discreetly. He saw him pack leftovers for the homeless without charging. He saw someone who gave without needing an audience. Richard began asking questions, not as an investor or philanthropist, but as a friend. Do you ever get tired of being kind when the world isn't? He once asked. Ethan thought for a moment. Sometimes. But I've realized, kindness doesn't lose value just because others overlook it. Richard nodded slowly, visibly moved. Over time, their conversations became the highlight of Ethan's day. In a world that only saw him as a waiter, Richard saw something else, a builder of hope. And for the first time in years, Ethan began to believe his dream wasn't completely gone. As Richard left one evening, he paused at the door. Ethan, he said, don't give up on your dream just because it's sleeping. Sometimes the right moment just hasn't woken up yet. Ethan smiled, not realizing that moment was closer than he thought. What would you do if you discovered someone with incredible talent living in such difficult circumstances? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. The weeks that followed turned into something Ethan hadn't experienced in a long time: consistency. Richard became more than just a customer. He became a mentor, a listener, and sometimes even the quiet voice that reminded Ethan he mattered. They'd talk about everything: life, regrets, the power of small gestures. Richard often came just before closing, when the cafe grew quiet and the lights dimmed. Ethan would serve him coffee, and they'd sit by the window overlooking the ocean, both lost in thought. One night, Richard said softly, you know, I've spent half my life chasing success. But lately, I've realized, the best investment I ever made was in people. Ethan smiled. Then you've just made another good one. They both laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from shared understanding, not circumstance. It wasn't just Richard who noticed Ethan's kindness anymore. The cafe regulars began talking. A few customers started leaving larger tips, some even donated food for the old man outside. One afternoon, the single mother Ethan often helped came in with her little girl. She handed Ethan a small envelope with shaky hands. Inside was a handwritten note: you helped me when I couldn't afford breakfast. I just got a new job. This is for you. It was only $20. But to Ethan, it felt like the world was finally giving back, one small miracle at a time. Richard watched from the corner table, his heart swelling. He saw what he had been searching for, proof that kindness could multiply. But just as life began to look brighter, trouble arrived. One cold morning, the cafe owner called a meeting. We're closing down next month, he announced. Tourism's dropped. Rent's gone up. I'm sorry, everyone. Ethan froze. The words hit like thunder. The Blue Lantern Café was more than a job, it was the last piece of his stability. Without it, he'd lose his income, his home, and maybe even his hope. That night, he told Richard. I don't know what to do, Ethan said, his voice trembling. I've given everything to this place. And now it's all gone. Richard looked deeply at him, his expression unreadable. Maybe this is not an ending, he said quietly. Maybe it's the push you need to start again. Ethan shook his head. Start again with what? I can't even pay next month's rent. Richard didn't answer immediately. He simply placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Don't lose faith. The right doors open when your heart stays open. In the days that followed, Ethan grew quieter. He worked his final shifts with a heavy heart. Richard came by less often, traveling for what he said were personal matters. Ethan tried not to take it personally, but it stung. He began to wonder, maybe kindness didn't really pay off. Maybe it was just something people said to feel better about losing. On his last day at the cafe, Ethan packed his few belongings into a worn backpack. As he turned off the lights, he whispered, "Goodbye, old friend." He didn't know it yet, but this goodbye was about to lead to something far greater than he could imagine. That evening, Ethan sat on a park bench overlooking the sea. The harmonica player played softly beside him, the melody carrying into the wind. "I tried," Ethan said, almost to himself. "I tried to stay kind. But where does it get me?" The old man stopped playing and looked at him. "Maybe it gets you where you're supposed to be, just not where you expected." Ethan looked away, fighting tears. The waves crashed, echoing the storm inside him. He didn't know it yet, but the universe was listening. A few nights later, Ethan received a call from the cafe manager. "Someone's asking for you, Ethan. Says it's urgent." Confused, he hurried back to the Blue Lantern. When he arrived, the lights were on, and standing at the counter was Richard, holding a sealed envelope and smiling like a man who had been waiting a long time for this moment. "Ethan," he said softly, "remember when I told you the best investment I ever made was in people?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Well, I think it's time for you to see what that means." Ethan stood frozen in the middle of the cafe, staring at Richard, who now looked more composed than ever. "Richard, what's going on?" he asked cautiously. Richard took a deep breath. "Ethan, I haven't been completely honest with you." He placed the envelope gently on the counter. "My name is Richard Lane. I'm a retired investor. I used to run one of the largest hospitality groups in the state. But after my wife passed away 2 years ago, I lost my sense of purpose. So I started traveling, quietly, anonymously, looking for something real. Looking for people who do good when no one's watching." Ethan's eyes widened. "The night you paid for my meal," Richard continued, "I saw something I hadn't seen in years, genuine compassion. You had nothing, yet you gave freely. That night, I decided if I ever found someone who lived kindness the way you do, I'd help them change the world." Richard slid the envelope across the table. Ethan hesitated, his hands trembling as he opened it. Inside was a neatly typed letter, an offer. Full funding to open your own restaurant in Harborview. A partnership in name only, all creative control is yours. There's only one condition: make it a place where kindness feeds everyone, not just the wealthy. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. I don't know what to say." Richard smiled. "Say you'll keep believing that kindness matters." Months later, the old Blue Lantern Café had transformed. The walls were repainted, the wooden counters polished, and a new sign hung above the door, "The Lantern Project." The name was Ethan's idea, a tribute to the place that had once kept his spirit alive when everything else felt dark. Inside, the restaurant had a new rhythm: laughter, music, warmth. Every meal came with an option: pay what you can. Those who could pay more often covered the cost for those who couldn't. Ethan hired the harmonica player as the evening entertainer. The single mother he once helped became the head server. Even the cafe's old cook returned, now teaching local teens how to prepare meals from scratch. Ethan didn't just open a restaurant, he created a movement. Word spread fast. The Lantern Project became more than a place to eat, it became a symbol of what Harborview could be. People began volunteering, donating, and connecting in ways they hadn't in years. Local fishermen brought in extra catches to feed families in need. Tourists stopped by not just for the view, but for the story of the waiter whose kindness built a home for compassion. Ethan often stood behind the counter, watching it all unfold. Every act of generosity reminded him that one simple gesture can ignite an entire town. One evening, as the sun set over the harbor, Richard visited the Lantern Project. He sat at his usual corner table, the one where he'd first met Ethan. Ethan brought over 2 cups of coffee. "You know," he said, smiling, "it still feels strange not wearing an apron." Richard chuckled. "You've earned the right to serve in a different way now." As they talked, a young boy entered the restaurant. His clothes were worn, his face shy. He handed Ethan a note. It read, "My mom and I don't have money, but she said if we come here, we can still eat." Ethan smiled and knelt down. "Of course you can. Dinner's on me tonight." Richard watched silently, a proud glimmer in his eyes. Still paying it forward, I see, he said softly. Ethan looked at him. You once told me kindness was the best investment. I guess I'm just collecting the returns. Both men laughed quietly as the harmonica began to play in the background, the same melody that once carried through the lonely pier. In time, the Lantern Project inspired other towns to start their own community kitchens. Ethan's story was shared on social media, news channels, and local papers. But Ethan never sought fame. He only wanted to remind people that goodness still exists. Harborview wasn't just surviving anymore. It was alive, thriving, because one tired waiter refused to let struggle make him cold. Soft instrumental music plays, mixed with the gentle hum of the ocean. A year had passed since the Lantern Project opened its doors. Harborview had changed in ways no one thought possible. The once struggling pier now buzzed with life, fishermen unloading their catches, children laughing near the water, and the comforting aroma of home-cooked meals drifting through the air. Inside the restaurant, a small plaque hung on the wall near the entrance. It read, "One act of kindness can light 1,000 lanterns." Ethan often stood beneath it, greeting guests with the same genuine warmth he'd shown that rainy afternoon when it all began. The single mother he'd once helped now managed the cafe's operations. The harmonica player performed every Friday night, his music filling the place with nostalgia and joy. And every so often, a traveler passing through town would stop, read the plaque and smile, not knowing that the story behind it was very real, and still unfolding. One evening, Richard returned. His steps were slower now, but his eyes were brighter, the kind of light that comes from peace. Ethan hurried to greet him. "Still running the world's kindest restaurant, I see," Richard said with a grin. "Trying to live up to my investors' expectations," Ethan replied, laughing. They sat by the same window where it all began, watching the sun sink into the horizon. "You know," Richard said, his voice softer now, "when I first walked in that day, I thought I was just a stranger in a cafe. Turns out, I was walking into my purpose." Ethan nodded. "And you helped me find mine." Richard smiled, then looked around the room filled with laughter, warmth, and community. "You did all this, Ethan. I just gave you the key. You built the door." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the harmonica's gentle tune. The sound carried memories, of loss, of struggle, and of hope reborn. As the Lantern Project gained recognition, news outlets began to cover Ethan's story. But Ethan always turned interviews into a message, not about success, but about compassion. He'd tell reporters, "You don't need money to change a life. Sometimes it's a smile, a meal, or simply noticing someone who feels invisible. That's how kindness works, it multiplies quietly." And it did. Across towns and cities, people began sharing their own stories, paying for strangers' meals, volunteering at shelters, or simply being a little gentler with one another. The world, for a moment, felt smaller, connected by unseen threads of compassion. Late one night, after closing, Ethan walked to the pier where his journey began. He watched the ocean, calm and endless, reflecting the moonlight. He thought about his father, about Richard, and about the hundreds of people whose lives had intertwined with his through a single act of kindness. A gentle breeze brushed his face as he whispered, "I finally did it, Dad. But not alone." Behind him, the soft notes of a harmonica floated through the air, and Ethan smiled. Because he knew, the music of kindness never really ends. It just finds new people to play it. Stories like this remind us that extraordinary kindness exists all around us, often in the people we least expect. Ethan's story isn't just about generosity, it's about courage, the courage to stay kind in a world that often forgets how. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to look around your own life. There's someone near you who could use a helping hand, a kind word, or even just your time. You can be the reason someone believes in goodness again. Ethan Cole continues to run the Lantern Project, now expanding to neighboring towns. Richard Lane established a foundation supporting young dreamers who show kindness through action. The people of Harborview say their town isn't just by the sea anymore, it's powered by compassion. And every year on the anniversary of the Lantern Project's opening, they light hundreds of lanterns and release them into the night sky, a tribute to the moment a waiter paid for a stranger's meal, and the world changed just a little because of it. If this story moved you, please like this video. It helps more people discover these powerful stories of compassion. Subscribe for more true and inspiring tales that restore faith in humanity. And most importantly, look for your own chance to be someone's unexpected blessing. What act of kindness will you perform this week? Tell me in the comments below. Your story might just inspire the next one we tell. Thank you for watching, and remember, kindness doesn't cost much, but its value lasts forever.